watching Weekly World News on SpringNectar TV, brought to you by Vibha Ramesh, Los Angeles, United States. First, the top headlines. Biden's agenda in centrist hands. Indian Prime Minister deems country a natural ally of open societies. Modi's take on G7. Israel authoritarian ousted from power after 12 long years. Delta variant of COVID spreads rapidly, 74 countries affected. G7 confirms goals, funds allocation still unknown. Over to news in detail. U.S. President Joe Biden's legislative agenda encompasses several measures, all of which are currently dependent on the green light from key centrist Joe Manchin. The early days of the administration saw a burst of measures including the $1.9 trillion coronavirus stimulus package and a close to $250 billion bill budgeted towards improvement of American competitiveness with China. However, 5 months later, the initial priorities have slowed down and are replaced by a set of Democratic priorities that are critical to Biden's vision. In other words, the Democrats' thin majority in the Senate has raised Manchin to a position of influence. As appropriately stated by Sarah Binder, professor of political science at George Washington University, Senator Manchin's influence there is shaping the agenda for the Democrats. He's the crux. He's everything around which the majority depends. Meanwhile, on Sunday, Biden overtly agreed with Vladimir Putin's latest assessment that the country's relationship with Russia is at a low point. However, he assured that it does not point towards a conflict of any kind. He also stated that the weakening of the bilateral relationship was because of Russia's mismanagement of affairs, including human rights violations, tolerating criminal cyber gangs, and election interference. In Biden's words, as he stated at a press conference, "I think he's right. It's a low point, and it depends on how he responds to, acting consistently with international norms, which in many cases he has not." And on Wednesday, he announced that the United States would not hesitate to retaliate if Russia continues to engage in cyber attacks against American targets. Further, marking the end of the G7 summit, Biden also addressed issues pertaining to climate crisis and future pandemics, among other crucial topics. In a nutshell, Biden construed the summit as an extraordinarily productive and collaborative effort. As a first step towards strengthening U.S. allies in tough regions, Biden announced his nominees to be ambassadors to Israel, Mexico, and NATO. To this extent, Thomas Knights as ambassador to Israel and Ken Salazar as ambassador to Mexico were some of the names that he announced on Tuesday. Over to India. As a lead speaker in one of the sessions named Open Societies in the G7 summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi remarked that India was a natural ally of G7 as the country takes pride in imbibing the core values of democracy and freedom in its civilization ethos. His speech was referenced by Additional Secretary Harish at a press conference as he stated, Prime Minister highlighted India's civilizational commitment to democracy, freedom of thought and liberty. As the world's largest democracy, India is a natural ally for the G7 and guest countries in defending these shared values from a host of threats stemming from authoritarianism, terrorism and violent extremism, disinformation and infodemics, and economic coercion. Meanwhile, the government stepped in with its Project O2 for India as the second wave of the virus swept the nation off of oxygen concentrators and other vital medical supplies. To this effect, Project O2 for India was initiated on Sunday with the goal of providing vital raw materials like zeolites, manufacturing of compressors, and establishing small oxygen plants. The project is expected to augment the nation's ability to meet the rising demand for oxygen used for medical purposes. That apart, student applicants to universities in the United States found themselves scrambling for interview slots as processing for student visas for the fall session resumed on Monday. It was found that with the hope of securing a spot for the interview, several applicants sparingly used the refresh key on the embassy portal, thereby leading to a glitch in the system. Unfortunately, some of the students were blocked by the system for 72 hours for suspicious activity. Following the incident, the U.S. Embassy released a tweet saying, "We are aware of the high demand for student visa appointments. Please remember, do not refresh too often, as you may be blocked out of your account." Moving on to Israel. After 12 long years of autocratic rule of Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader was forced out of office by a coalition of rivals. The string that brought the rivals together was their determination to end Netanyahu's rule. The stepping down of Netanyahu was impending, especially in the light of the several protests and cries by the public to end his dictatorship rule. As was cleverly penned by a columnist for Israel's leading daily newspaper, over the past few years he became his own greatest enemy. His egocentrism, his personal and public paranoia, his avarice, his ongoing incitement, and his hubris unified the opposition to him from across the political spectrum to the point that they joined forces to successfully bring him down. That said, the opposition leader, Yair Lapid, who won by a thin margin of 59 seats, will not walk into the prime minister's position immediately. News has it that according to the power-sharing agreement, Naftali Bennett would be the prime minister for the first 2 years of the 4-year term and then hand over the role to Lapid. Consequently, Bennett, a far-right advocate for the settler movement in the Palestinian territories, swore in as prime minister on June 13th. Less than 2 days after he took charge, he has already been termed a traitor by some right-wing Israelis. Over to the latest variant of COVID. Identified first in India, the Delta variant of the virus is known to be spreading rapidly as the strain has already been confirmed in 74 countries. Outbreaks of this variant across Africa, United States, China, and several other countries have raised fears that this strain could turn out to be the most dominant strain from a global perspective. One of the primary reasons for the concern is its rapid nature of transmission and ability to cause more serious illnesses. Based on data provided by the FDA, the Delta variant doubles every 2 weeks and has accounted for nearly 10% of all new cases. Even as health authorities are vehemently spreading word of the dangerous strain and sharing critical data on a regular basis, there lurks a growing concern that the virus may have already spread much further than has been reported, especially in the developing countries. The 3-day G7 summit, which was the first in-person summit since the start of the pandemic, culminated on Sunday with rich nations reconfirming their goals. Their primary goals included limiting global heating to 1.5 centigrade and consenting to protect and restore 30% of the natural world by 2030. However, there wasn't much clarity on the funds provision or allocation to achieve the set goals. Another key issue addressed by the summit included UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's deal on climate finance. To this extent, he pitched to the rich nations to finance climate issues, especially cutting greenhouse gas emissions and managing the impact of climate breakdown. However, the deal had fallen short by a large margin. As said by Jennifer Morgan, Executive Director of Greenpeace, the G7 have failed to set us up for a successful COP26, as trust is sorely lacking between rich and developing countries. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced that lockdown restrictions will be retained for another 4 weeks. This move was made with the intention of ramping up the vaccination program. He also asserted that post the 4-week period, there will be no more delay in easing the existing restrictions. Subsequently, he has marked July 19th as the date when all restrictions on social contact could be lifted, provided everything is ceteris paribus and no new variant emerges. In his words, now is the time to ease off the accelerator because by being cautious now, we have the chance in the next 4 weeks to save many thousands of lives by vaccinating millions of more people. Over to the Brexit scenario. There lurks an impending fear that several British nationals living in France, Luxembourg, Malta, and Latvia may lose employment, healthcare benefits, and other rights if they do not apply for resident status in the next 14 days. Commenting on the risk posed by the deadline, Jane Golding, a senior European Union law specialist, said, "We think the deadline should be extended even at this later stage because you are removing people's rights, which is very serious. This will impact access to healthcare, pensions, rental of properties, ability to get mortgages, employment, all the same sorts of issues impacting European Union citizens living in the United Kingdom." And in Mexico, investigators unearthed bone fragments belonging to 17 different victims. Based on their investigation of a suspected serial killer, they began excavating his house since May 17th and have so far unearthed 3,787 bone fragments. The shocking revelation led experts and lawmakers to believe that there is more than what meets the eye. Consequently, they planned to widen the search to rooms the suspect had rented out to. Identity cards and other documents revealed that the killings may go back several years. What is even more horrifying is the modus operandi of the killer. A statement given by the office on Saturday read, "The bone fragments are being subjected to lateralization studies, which include carefully cleaning each one, identifying what part of the body they are, and then placing them in their anatomical position, providing a method for determining the approximate number of victims." Going by the findings, experts say the killer may have hacked the victims to pieces. This piece of information also gave them a hunch of who the killer might be. All we know now is he is around 72 years of age. Over to sports. This year's French Open had fans sitting on tenterhooks as both the men's and women's tournaments set off on a challenging ride. Men's finals culminated with Novak Djokovic taking home the trophy. He beat Rafael Nadal 3-2. This was one of the greatest wins for Djokovic. And in women's singles, Barbora Krejcikova beat Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova 2-1 and took home this year's French Open trophy. Ending this week's bulletin with news from Africa. A 1,098-carat diamond was discovered in Botswana, which experts say is the third largest kind in the world. The world's largest and second largest diamonds were also found in South Africa, with the largest gem being a 3,106-carat cullinan found in 1905, and the latter being a 1,109-carat Lesedi Larona discovered in 2015. The big rock was discovered by diamond firm Debswana, whose managing director said that it is believed to be the third largest gem quality find in the world. While for the wealthier nations, the find may just be another feather on the cap, for Botswana, it's a stone of hope, one that could uplift the economically weak nation. With that, I bring you to the end of this week's news bulletin. Watch the space for more world news next Friday on SpringNectar TV. Thank you for watching.